Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know the history of Catholic religious orders' complicity with slavery? This is one of several videos which will examine the history of Catholic religious orders' complicity with slavery. Follow-up videos will explore what is being done today by Catholic religious orders and other faith institutions to address their complicity with slavery. And so we begin with just the whole notion that from the very beginning in the United States, the Catholic Church, along with many of the religious orders, and like most of the United States, were all complicit in chattel slavery and racism. They were complicit in the buying and selling of slaves, in other words. This history is little known in the United States because it was erased from the history books written about the Catholic movement in the United States. And as a matter of fact, black Catholics and the role of black Catholics in U.S. history is never mentioned in many of the history books that were written. But many religious orders, especially those religious orders that had pre-Civil War roots, for example, really owned, especially in the South in the United States, owned plantations that were gifted to them by wealthy donors. They owned plantations and they owned slaves, and they actually bought and sold slaves. And they saw nothing wrong with this at all, nothing immoral about this, even based on their scriptural reading and so on. The most prominent example of this of a religious order owning slaves is the Society of Jesus, or better known as the Jesuits. In the 1780s, we have the earliest written record of Jesuits owning slaves. As a matter of fact, slaves in the United States, primarily for the religious orders, really supported the expansion of schools, churches, institutions, and many of the universities that were established. As a matter of fact, in 1838, 272 slaves owned by the Jesuits were sold in order to keep Georgetown University out of financial ruin. So many of these religious orders segregated based on color, and as a result, what would happen is it forced religious women and men to start their own religious order in order to, establish religious communities in the United States. So in 1828, we have the first established religious order of black nuns called the Oblate Sisters of Providence. This was established in Baltimore, Maryland by Mother Mary Lange. They were the first, as we said, first successful black women's religious order. They took a major stance, as early as 1828, a major stance against slavery. They never segregated or had any restrictions with regards to admissions in any of their communities or institutions and so on. And they were one of the first group to really educate enslaved boys and girls, men and women. In 1842, for example, the Sisters of the Holy Family were established in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, there was much opposition to the establishment of these religious orders from the broader population, so much so that for these religious orders, they were not permitted to wear their religious garb, the veil especially, in public because they wanted to make sure that they were distinguished from the white sisters and so on. And so this was built-in prejudice and racism from the very beginning. We have, in 1916, we had the Franciscan Handmaids of the Most Pure Heart of Mary that were established in Savannah, Georgia. And then we also had the Sisters, another group called the Sisters of the Good Shepherd that were established in Baltimore, Maryland again. It was only after the Second World War, roughly 1945 onward, that number of religious orders began to reluctantly desegregate. much of this was being done because of the push from some priests that were working in African American parishes primarily to advocating these religious orders for sisters that were black that could then minister to, in their parishes, to African Americans and so on. And so much of that push and number of religious orders began to desegregate. But even when they did, they were doing so reluctantly, they actually practiced segregation within the very community itself. Black sisters were not allowed to eat with white sisters. They were not allowed to pray in the same space with the white sisters. And then when they went on outings at conferences and things like that, they were not allowed to go out or not allowed to mix with white sisters. And so reluctantly, as I said, the religious orders began to desegregate, and only recently has it become a kind of a lived reality. Very slowly. So this is part of the history of the United States, complicity, especially with religious orders, Catholic Church complicity with chattel slavery and with racism. And I hope you'll return back again to our second video where we'll address how these religious orders are now acknowledging their history and trying to do something about it. So thank you very much, and I hope you return again to our second video.